This is co-host Tom, and you're listening to the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Welcome to the Paperback Warrior Podcast. Once again, this is your co-host Eric. Thanks for tuning in and for another exciting episode here. We've got a lot of great things planned for today. Remember to check out our site online. I want to make sure we plug that, paperbackwarrior.com. And the reason why is because we've been on there for about 4 years, so you're going to have a lot of archived reviews to check out. Remember, on the right-hand side, there's going to be tags, and those tags will show you a lot of different things, authors, genres, really kind of specific things like post-apocalyptic or crime-noir. You can even look at series like Executioner or Equal Force, those kind of things. So really delve into the website. There's a lot of great content there. We've worked really hard over the years to get a lot of great reviews and authors on there. So be sure to check that out. Also, new reviews every single weekday. Monday mornings, new shows here for the podcast. And then every afternoon, typically you'll see an archived review, all on our social media. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And last episode, Tom teased us a little bit. He said he was going to the great state of Texas to visit some bookstores in San Antonio. Did you go?
I did. So I went to San Antonio, Texas, and I went to my two favorite bookstores there. One is called Nine Lives Books, and the other is called The Book Rack. So at Nine Lives Books, went in there. I was not bowled over impressed with the stuff on the shelves, but then I found this spinner rack kind of in a back room that had a lot of vintage paperbacks. And I bought three really weird, I thought two great paperbacks. One is called The Merriweather File by Lionel White. Lionel White was a popular author in the 1950s, maybe even into the 60s, and he wrote heist books, very much like Richard Stark's Parker books, but with not a continuing character. He was sort of like John Dixon Carr writes locked room mysteries. Lionel White writes heist books. And so The Merriweather File, don't know much about it. I know it has been reprinted by Starkhouse, but I haven't read that, so now I have a paperback of the original. I also got a paperback by a guy named William McGivern that I've covered a lot, which I think was written in the 50s or 60s, called A Choice of Assassins. I was pleased to find that. Then I found this weird paperback, Eric, and you and I puzzled over what this was. It was called God's Renegade by Johnny North. And on the cover it has like a guy, like a beer belly looking guy with a biker vest on and a motorcycle, and then the rebel flag in the background. It was published by Zebra Books, and I did a little homework online and asked some people what they knew about it. And I guess there was a window of time where Zebra Books was doing autobiographies of prisoners in jail who I've essentially probably just told their stories to some ghostwriter who wrote the books in first person from these inmates. And so I guess the Johnny North book, God's Renegade, is one of those. It has a very alluring, cheesy cover that makes it look like a men's adventure. It may actually be some kind of Christian allegory about Johnny North finding Jesus in prison. I will never read this book, but it's just interesting enough to have on my shelves that I'm going to do that. Then I went to the Book Rack in San Antonio, which is actually technically not in San Antonio. It's in a suburb. I think it might be called Universal City or something along those lines, just northeast of the city. And I found three great books there. One is Cockfighter by Charles Willeford, which I haven't read yet, but I'm going to. And we have some Charles Willeford content coming up. I should do a whole episode about that guy. He had a fascinating life. And then a book called Red Heroine by Jerry Pournelle, who's a famous science fiction writer. Then this was his first book, which was a spy adventure story, which I read, and it'll be reviewed on paperbackwarrior.com soon enough. And then I got a book that I had my eye on for a while at a local bookstore here, but never picked it up, called Whore Mother by Sean Heron. It's a IRA book, and I figured if I don't read it, it might just be a suitable Mother's Day gift. So that was my San Antonio trip, and that's that.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun. How were the prices there?
The prices were good. I think I probably spent an average of about $2 a book at the Book Rack. I feel like the Nine Lives one was maybe a little more expensive because this was in the special vintage rack as opposed to just mixed in with the genres. I would say $3 to $5 a book. I don't think I spent more than $2 on that God's Revenge book or God's Renegade book. And I probably overpaid if I did spend $2.
There were a lot of IRA kind of books in the 80s, and I want to say What do you think? A lot of that fiction got kicked off with Tom Clancy's Patriot games.
I think Jack Higgins was writing IRA books. I think most of the British authors who were kind of dealing with the issues with the IRA, probably in the 70s and 80s, would gravitate to IRA as a story. I think in general, if you're a men's adventure novelist, you need to come up with a villain that's and oftentimes ripping stuff from the headlines is going to move sales. And so, the World War II, at some point it became kind of lame to go looking for the Nazi gold again and again and again, because at some point the Nazis were all just burned out old men living in Argentina. But the IRA for these British authors was sort of a fresh and hip thing to write about, and everybody was probably very scared that a school bus was going to blow up and attribute it to the IRA. And you saw the same thing in Hollywood movies as well.
Right. Yeah. It's been a while since I've read anything that had sort of an IRA type of theme to it, but I just haven't heard that in a long time. So it's interesting that you mentioned it.
Yeah. So we should probably talk about what we're going to be doing this episode. I'm going to be doing a feature on some tips and tricks to acquire vintage paperbacks. And this will tie into another feature I'm going to be doing next episode that I'll talk about later. And we have 2 reviews scheduled. One is Eric is going to be reviewing a Johnny-Fletcher novel called Swing Low, Swing Dead by Frank Gruber. And I'm going to be reviewing a book by Lou Cameron called Code 7. Should we launch right into my feature? Or you got anything else?
Yeah, tell us all about it. Go for it.
Okay, so I want to get away from sort of discussing a author or label right now and sort of discuss strategies. We hear from a lot of people that seem to be thoroughly jealous of the embarrassment of riches we have in northern Florida when it comes to used bookstores and our ability to get books at reasonable prices here. But I want to posit that it's entirely possible to do this in other places of America and perhaps even the world if you employ some of these tricks. If you're a reader and not some obsessive, this should not be a particularly expensive hobby. Everyone who's ever tried to sell their paperbacks is always shocked at how little their books are truly worth and the utter lack of demand for the books that we all love if you try to sell your books. And this makes no economic sense because when you're looking for a specific book that you want to buy online, it always seems to cost you a small fortune. It's this weird economic anomaly. And I'm here to say that the buying individual used books from sellers online can, in fact, be expensive, but I think there's a better way. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Let's start with online resources. I'm aware of 3 really good resources online for paperback buying. First is Amazon. I'm not going to talk about that too much. Amazon does sell used books. Amazon is just serving basically as a marketplace for used book dealers and used bookstores, and that could be a rather expensive option. There's a company called Abe Books, that's ABE, that does a very nice job selling books, and I often find if I'm looking for a very specific title and a very specific author, I've had better luck on Abe Books than I have on Amazon or eBay as far as the prices, and I've never been ripped off in a deal. But I want to talk about eBay because I think eBay can be an embarrassment of riches if you set it up right. Talking about some eBay strategies, the setting up alerts. eBay allows you to set up an alert so you can either hit your alerts and see what's there today, or have alerts actually text you or email you. The alerts could be, I like to use general phrases like men's adventure paperbacks or pulp paperback lots. I always like to add the word lots to it because that lot in the world of eBay means they're going to be selling multiple books at once, which allows you to kind of leverage buying things in volume. And so I'll find a lot of pulp paperback books and I'll look through and I'll see how many books in that lot do I really want. And let's say it's a lot of 20 books and there's 5 that I want. I set a price for myself on how much I'm willing to pay for a paperback. My price is usually $3 or $4 for a paperback. So if there's 5 books I want in there and I'm willing to pay $4, that lot to me, no matter how many books there is really only worth $20. And so that will be my bid if we're doing an auction, or my offer if we're not doing an auction, or the price that I'm looking to buy it now with on eBay. Hopefully this makes sense. So you end up winning a bunch of auctions that way, or buying a bunch of lots of books, and you'll maybe get, again, 20 books, but there's only 5 you want. That's okay, because you end up with 15 books you don't want, but I'm going to talk about how to monetize that. Another secret trick I do on eBay, it's not that secret, is you can sort eBay options for buy it now, which means it's a set price, but you can also sort for accept offers. And the idea with accepting offers is that you can make an offer below the buy it now price to the seller and see if they accept the offer. And then you kind of dicker back and forth online through the eBay platform until you can reach a price that you both like. I love doing that because the fact that anyone has a book on eBay or a lot of books that they're trying to sell means they want to get rid of it. It means that their wife is probably barking down their throat, telling them to get rid of these books. And so these people are motivated to get rid of the books. And again, although you like these books and I like these books, fact of the matter is globally, there's not that much demand for old paperbacks. Whenever you go into a used bookstore and you buy some used paperbacks, the proprietor will often tell you, this thing's been sitting on the shelves here for 15 years. And so the people out there, when they go to used bookstores, they don't want to buy these books from the 1950s and 60s. You and I do, but most people don't. Most people want to buy the James Patterson book that came out 6 months ago. So the lowballing an offer on the make an offer function, accept offers function, has provided me with just tons of books really cheap. Here's a fun trick I learned from my friend Nathan up in Wisconsin. The idea of misspelling stuff in your eBay search. For example, there's an author I really like named Bruno Fischer. He spells Fischer Fischer. He's a great author in the 1950s. I love his work. I have a search set up, an alert for Bruno Fischer, Fischer, misspelling his last name. You would be amazed at the number of people out there who misspell his name. So again, I'm not competing with anyone else during the auction. And oftentimes the books that are misspelled sit there and languish. And you can watch the price go down, down, down over time if it's a buy it now auction. And you can make an offer on those books and get them for a steal. I have a pretty sizable Bruno Fischer library at home solely based on people misspelling his last name. So I think that's everything I wanted to say about eBay. I want to touch upon non-traditional sources of books really quickly. In the southeast United States where we live, and I'm sure this exists in other parts of the countries, but generally in rural America, there are flea markets, and these are not just a one-time thing. These are giant established places and fairgrounds where they have, pre-made cheap buildings, and people rent spaces and tables in those buildings to sell their wares, whether it's their their needlepoint stuff or their old T-shirts, or in the old days they would probably sell bootleg CDs. Inevitably at the flea markets we find there are usually used booksellers who have just piles of used books there, and those are great ways to get books cheap, and those people are always willing to bargain and dicker. I've often had good luck with thrift stores and charity shops. Goodwill and Salvation Army have major chains throughout the U.S. And again, these are places where people who don't want their books anymore can bring them and just to donate them. I find I'm probably buying a lot of dead man's books in using that method. I've had good luck at antique stores. There's a particular antique store down in Ocala, Florida that Eric and I have been doing a great job of getting basically all the books out of that place into our libraries. Antique stores often sell old bookshelves, and the way to sell old bookshelves is to have old books sitting on them. I've never explored the idea of estate sales, but I think there's probably something to be gained there. I don't really know exactly how estate sales work, but sometimes these people die. People who have books from the 1950s often lived in the 1950s, and sadly, a lot of the people who were of reading age in the 1950s are passing away. And so the opportunity to get their books and get them into your library as opposed to the city dump is an opportunity. I haven't had the best luck with garage sales, but it may be possible. I've had decent luck with church rummage sales. Used bookstores are going out of business all the time, so if you can keep your radar up for going out of business sales, these used bookstores are just looking to unload their inventory for next to nothing. There's a Facebook Marketplace, YouBid, and Craigslist. I haven't tried many of those. Now I want to touch upon a strategy that's been an embarrassment of riches for us. It's library book sales. Now, your library probably, whenever someone donates a book to a library, it can't go on the shelves of the library and into circulation. That's just not how libraries work. They can't put any book on the shelf without it going through some sort of governmental committee. So what they do is they take these books that get donated and they sell them in library book sales. Sometimes that's just a single bookshelf in the library that is selling books for super cheap. Other times they have a freestanding bookstore within the library staffed by volunteers. But more often than not, there's an annual or quarterly giant library book sale where they put out every single book that was donated and decommission library books and selling those for next to nothing. And so those are generally huge sales filled with bestsellers, but sometimes you're going to find those old books there because somebody dies and the wife wants to donate it to the library. You can find out where the library book sales are in your area by going to booksalefinder.com. It's a very helpful website, and I've driven for 3-4 hours to go to some of the bigger ones. So the other great thing to think about with the library book sales is the idea of and the last day of the book sale, and sometimes the first day, they have a bag sale where you're going to pay $5 or $6 for an entire brown paper grocery bag full of books. So what I would recommend doing is get any of the books you want from the book sale and then fill it up with current bestsellers, the James Patterson books, the romance novels, any book that's a huge bestseller, which is the type of thing that used bookstores would have. You're not going to read these books, and you're not going to keep these books in your possession for very long. But what you're going to do, though, is you're going to use those books as currency at your local used bookstores. And so let's shift over to used bookstores. Let me address that. So you find a used bookstore, you find out what their credit policy is. Some used book, you bring them your bag of books that you got, not the decommissioned library books, but the nice, clean looking, good condition, James Patterson recent bestsellers. You bring and you paid probably a dime a book for these things once it's all worked out. You bring them into the used bookstore, they're going to give you some factor of the cover price in credit at that bookstore. And so some used bookstores give you dollar for dollar credit. If you have $100 worth of credit at that used bookstore, you can walk out the door with $100 worth of books. More used bookstores, though, will give you 50 cents on the dollar credit. Or if you have $100 worth of book, let's say you want to buy $10 worth of used books at that bookstore and you got all the credit, you can take $5 and you burn it up with credit, and then you got to pay $5 cash. But then that you're still cutting the price of your used books that you want in half, and you're using as currency used books that you don't give a darn about because you paid a dime for them at some library bag sale. Now, used bookstores are going out of business all the time, so if you happen to find a used bookstore online, you want to always call first to make sure that they actually still exist. I have shown up to plenty of empty, abandoned buildings, expecting to find a used bookstore there that has been gone for a few months. I'm on the road a lot with my job. I'm constantly driving around America. And so what I do is when I plot my route out, I literally go to Google Maps and Yelp, and I enter in used bookstores, and I basically track along my route to see what used bookstores happen to exist within 10, 15 minutes of the highway that I'm going to be going down. And I find so many used bookstores that way, and then I check Yelp to see if the reviews are, if it's truly a used bookstore. I can also do the same thing if I have time to burn with thrift stores or antique shops or flea markets. Then I go in there and I always keep this bag of books or this box of old books in the trunk of my car that I use as currency at these used bookstores to get the books I want for cheap. And the other thing, a couple things you need to do is you want to charm the booksellers at these used bookstores. Give them your name and number. Tell them you're looking for vintage paperbacks, and if they should get somebody who trades in a bunch of them, to give you a call, and you'd be happy to drive a couple hours to see them. It's always worth your time to ask the used booksellers about vintage paperbacks. I look for 1950s and 1960s mystery and action adventure spy type paperbacks. And I said, do you have any of those here that are, one, segregated from the rest of the books, or two, stored away somewhere at either in a back room, in a storage facility, in the garage of their house that you can make an appointment to go see? Again, these used booksellers don't like and aren't generally interested in selling books that cost 35 cents 50 years ago. They're going to make more money selling the James Patterson books. And shelf space is at a premium for these guys. And so oftentimes they will have boxes of vintage paperbacks that are sitting in the back room in a box, hoping that someone like you is going to come along, and they will go and get that box for you and then sell you those books. There's a bookstore somewhere in Florida, I'm not going to say where it is, that I've been speaking to the owner, and I got to take a road trip out there. It's not terribly close to here, but that guy says he's sitting on dozens and dozens of boxes of vintage paperbacks that he just hasn't had time to shelve that he got super cheap, that he's interested in having me go through to make him an offer. So I'm excited to do that. I want to talk about so that's basically my used bookstore strategy, but make sure you communicate with the bookseller to find out if they have vintage paperbacks handy. I got a couple other strategies in mind for getting used books, but do you want to weigh in on anything?
Yeah. So listeners might want to ask, we're the Paperback Warrior. Why do you collect paperbacks? Why don't you collect hardback books?
I collect paperbacks because it's a good question. I'm always kind of running around, and so paperbacks are just easier to store. We'll talk about Kindle and ebooks on a different episode, but I do like the covers. I make fun of people who worship the covers, but I actually like the covers on them. I think they're alluring. It's also a cheaper investment. Old hardcovers, especially ones from the 1950s, fall into the general category of antiquarian books, and they're truly more collectible and have a higher value than the paperbacks. And so for me, this is a cheap hobby where for $2 I can be entertained for a week while I'm reading a book. So I don't really mess with hardcovers, and we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of having lots and lots of paperback books next episode. But that's why I don't really bother with I'm not saying I don't have hardcovers, especially if I see something cheap from an author I like a Lawrence Block or a Donald Westlake at a library book sale, and it's going to cost me a dime or so. I'll pick it up, but I'm just not really a hardcover guy, and trade paperbacks don't generally fit my shelving system that well, so I try to avoid those. But everything seems to be moving in that direction. I want to talk to you about another idea to accumulate a lot of books really quickly, and it's a trade box. Near as I can tell, this is a concept invented by a fellow by the name of Rick Croxton, a friend of mine in Arkansas. And what you do is you get 4 or 5 guys together, or maybe 10 or 12 people together, who are good, trustworthy people who have decent used book collections. If you don't know people who are like that, join a Facebook group. There's plenty out there for vintage paperbacks. And you start a trade box. And the idea is you start the trade box because you end up getting the best deal then. And maybe you seed the trade box with a box of, say, 10, 15, 20 paperback books. Maybe you want to theme them and say these are books from the 1950s and 60s, crime novels, men's adventure novels, serial vigilante books. You get to decide what the theme is and get these guys lists. Get everyone's name and address. And basically, you box up the 15 or 20 books. You send them to the first guy on the list. That guy pops open the box, and then he takes as many books as he wants out of that box. But he has to replenish the same number that he took or greater, filled with books from his collection that he wants to do. And you need to have a blood oath with these guys that they're not going to dump a bunch of Danielle Steele books on you while they're taking all your Donald Hamilton books. And then that guy sends it to the next person who does the same thing. The box will grow because people tend to be good people and generous in these things. And then eventually it comes back to you at the end, and you started with 10 or 15 books, and now the box is coming back to you with 20 or 30 books, hopefully some of which are going to be books that you like and you want to have in your collection. It's always interesting to see what books never get taken and actually make their way around America. You can use the media mailing function with the U.S. Postal Service, which ends up being fairly cheap to mail something. You can mail a sizable box for $5-6. And you're going to end up with a bunch of books that you're not that interested in. But remember, books are currency to use booksellers. You bring those books in and you get credit for them and get the books you want. And again, eventually you will find that the size of your library will compound. So the trade box has been a great success for me. I've been in dozens of them, and I've never, ever been screwed in them. I mean, I've gotten books that I don't like, but again, books are currency, so it doesn't bother me if I walk away with 5 or 6 books that I like and then 15 or 20 books I don't like, as long as I know that I can unload them somewhere. Another source for reading great books is reprint houses like Hardcase Crime, Wildside Press, Dark House, Brash Books, and others. We'll talk in another episode, but I want to encourage people to open their hearts to Kindle. More and more books from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s are finally getting digitized and put onto Kindle. And I can hear what you're saying right now, old man, that you like paper. You don't like the idea of reading it digitally. And I'll tell you that every single person who's an enthusiastic Kindle reader said the exact same thing at one point. And the other thing, old man, is that your eyes aren't getting any better. And the font on a lot of these old books that you and I love is incredibly small and difficult to read because they were fighting hard to fit it into 180 pages. And the Kindle solves that problem as well. Bad ideas, things that may be fun, but you're not going to get good deals on books. I would say conventions, pulp conventions, big shows, giant paperback shows. Those are a lot of fun. They're great for browsing. They're great for networking. Sometimes you can meet some people that you met online from different forums. You can go to the panels. You can look at the art. But I would say it's a terrible place to buy books, and it's just sheer economics. The book dealers there are not going to show up with the giants and rent a table for hundreds of dollars to sell you 25 and 50 cent books. The books that you're going to see at these shows tend to be very expensive. And so That's all I have. Next episode, I'm going to continue this conversation, explaining to you why you want to have more books in your library than you will ever live long enough to read, and what to do with those books once you have them. We're going to get you organized so you have an actual paperback library that'll be a source of pride for you and your family, and not some hoarder house, which is a monument to your mental illness. So that's all I got as far as how to acquire books, and I want to throw it over to you for a book review.
All right, that was really interesting. A lot of good ideas. Some I practiced, but others that were brand new to me. So thanks for that. I appreciate it. Next review here, or I guess the first review of the show, is a novel called Swing Low, Swing Dead. It was written by Frank Gruber. He's an old pulp guy. He wrote probably 300 stories or more for the old pulp mags. He wrote a large number of mysteries and westerns. I read one of his last year. In fact, I'm just looking at it now. It was called This Gun is Steel, and it was really, really good. It's an old Western from 1967. Has one of the best opening scenes of any Western I've read. You can read the review online at paperbackwarrior.com under Frank Gruber. This Gun is Steel was really good. So it prompted me to read another one of his books. This one, surprisingly, is the 17th novel in a series of books starring a character named Johnny Fletcher. Johnny Fletcher series was written between 1940 and 1964. Frank Gruber passed away in 1969, so that was really the end of the series. But it started with The French Key, which was published in 1940. That was a really big hit for Gruber, and it got adapted for the big screen in 1946. Both NBC and ABC, both of those networks, actually tried to do a Johnny Fletcher series as a radio serial. I guess during the golden age of radio, this was the 40s. They tried two different seasons. NBC did the first one, ABC did the second one, and I guess they just couldn't get it off the ground. But in 1964, from what I can gather, Frank Gruber apparently signed a paperback deal with Belmont Tower, which is sort of a low-end publisher. Their books are everywhere in the used bookstores. They dabbled in a lot of different things. So I pride myself on owning a lot of Belmont books because they did have some great novels, but they had some really bad ones too. But Gruber, he apparently signs a deal with them to where Belmont can go back and reprint a number of the series titles. But they misrepresented the series because they make it look as if Johnny Fletcher is this gun-toting detective or spy. It's got sort of this espionage or thriller kind of painting, and he's holding this automatic weapon, and it's just silly because Johnny Fletcher isn't a private eye. It's not a gun-toting series. It's more like Johnny Fletcher is just he's sort of just a con man. He's just a con man, and he bumbles his way into different mysteries and ultimately solves a crime. But Belmont,
they're comedic mysteries, aren't they? Aren't they kind of funny? Isn't that sort of the thing? Aren't they sort of ridiculous and over the top? Is in his bumbling? I've never read them, but I've heard that.
Yeah, they're humorous. They've got a lot of funny scenes, funny characters, and it's not really taken too seriously, but it's a lot of fun to read. But the way that the Gruber structured this was his deal with Belmont allowed them to reprint a lot of the series, obviously for marketing scheme to reprint it to look like it's an action book. But interesting, it was two additional books that he signed on for. The first was The Corpse Moved Upstairs, and this book, which is The Swing Low, Swing Dead, and both of them are from 1964, just before he passed away. So they squeezed in two new novels after the first run of the books. But the novels star Fletcher and his sidekick Sam Cragg. They're in every book. And most of the novels are also going to include the duo's landlord, a craggy old guy named Mr. Peabody, who manages the 45th Street Hotel in New York, where Johnny and Cragg live. They're basically destitute. They're always poor. They're always into some kind of financial scheme to raise money. And one of the ways that they do that is they pawn off this book on every street corner called Every Man is a Samson. And Cragg is the strong man. So he'll take his shirt off and he'll bend or break a plastic chain, and then they'll sell the book and promise everyone that they'll look like Cragg after a couple weeks of very moderate exercise. So that's how they make a living. The book starts out with them basically trying to raise money by playing craps in an upstairs hotel room. And there's a singer there named Willie Waller. He's had a little bit of a success with radio, and he's there, and everyone's out of money. So Waller bets a song manuscript to Craig, which ultimately he loses. And he says to Craig that the song is actually worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, which seems fantastical, but apparently Craig is extremely excited about this. Well, the mystery is that Craig finds that Waller has been killed in his hotel room. He's been found dead, and now Craig has this song manuscript, and he thinks that he's going to be a suspect in the crime. Johnny Fletcher's involved to try to help him out. Well, to complicate things further, this song that he possesses ends up becoming a radio hit by a musician named Al Donnelly. So as they get further into this, they think that the producer that's helping Al Donnelly actually stole the song from Waller, changed a few minor notes or lyrics, and then passed it off as an original. Well, now Craig wants his hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of song that he owns the rights to, but he wants to chase Al Donnelly and his producer to try to figure out if Waller was an original songwriter of this hit song, or if Donnelly and his producer actually have the rights to the song. Anyway, it involves a little bit of crime, a lot of mystery, and a whole lot of fun. It's funny. The characters are funny. Mr. Peabody's interaction with the two is classic. And if you want, you can go. I'm going to look it up here. It's I got it written down. It's oldtimeradiodownloads.com. Again, oldtimeradiodownloads.com. You can go on there and you can listen to at least one episode of the original Johnny Fletcher mystery show from the mid-40s. And you can get these old Belmont Tower paperbacks for just a couple bucks online. I think they're worth your money. That's all I got for that one.
All right, great. Thank you. And tell me the name of the book one more time. People like to hear it again.
Swing Low, Swing Dead by Frank Gruber.
All right, cool. I'm going to move on to my review. It's Code 7 by Lou Cameron. So Lou Cameron was one of these guys, just one of these journeyman author who wrote tons and tons of books. He lived from 1924 to 2010, and I'd say he's one of the most reliably solid authors in the men's adventure genre. He wrote crime novels, he wrote war novels, he wrote westerns. He actually invented and was the father of the long arm Western series, and he wrote many of the first 300 episodes of that thing, and the series went on for over 400, even beyond his death. I've reviewed a couple of his books on the Paperback Warrior site, including File on a Missing Redhead, which is a great, just straight up hard-boiled mystery novel from, I think, the 1950s. Maybe it was 1960. It was a Fawcett Gold Medal book. And his very first book, Angel's Flight, wasn't a real mystery, but it was just a really interesting novel about the Jazz Age. Anyway, I want to review his 1977 police fiction paperback, Code 7. The cover blurb promises that the book has all the crunching excitement of Walking Tall, and the back cover guarantees a nerve-sizzling suspense novel. Now, I'm a huge fan of Lou Cameron's writing. I've never read anything really bad by him, and I was excited to read about crunching excitement and sizzling nerves. And it's a straight-up police story. There's a guy by the name of Sean Costello, who's the new chief of police in a fictional city called Flamingo Beach, Florida, which is a tiny town of about 3 square miles. And he was recently fired from his police job in New Jersey due to budget cuts. He's this honest cop who's dedicated to keeping his little town safe, even though he has no resources and not much staff. Now, the idea of him calling a book Code 7 is a little weird because in police language, Code 7 is a meal break. It's, I'm going on Code 7 to have some lunch, which is an odd choice for a title. You would think that he would have titled it something a little more dangerous sounding. And Cameron makes it seem as if Code 7 means off-duty, which I suppose is close enough, but it's really a lunch break. The relevance of the title was never 100% clear to me. A romance develops with the main character and with a wealthy widow, and so the storyline involving the romance seemed a little rushed, but the idea is that he's too busy putting out small fires, and he's never truly Code 7 or off-duty to devote his time to the romance. And it's a weird book. For the majority of the book, Costello's dealing with normal, everyday headaches, threats, and small mysteries of the job. Drunks, a floater, a mouthy runaway, a stalker case, suicide attempt. It's a book of subplots that never really develops into a main plot. It was a decent police procedural. Cameron either did his homework or he did a good job faking it and seemed to have an understanding on what a cop's life was. But it's almost like he decided to write several different short stories, maybe to submit to mystery magazines about this police officer, and they decided to shuffle them all together into a novel. Some of the stories tie into each other, so others don't. It was a bit of a mess. His writing's always good, but it's just a really odd book to read. For instance, there's no chapter breaks whatsoever. You're reading a 219-page novel that's essentially just one long chapter, which you think wouldn't be irritating, but just bugged the hell out of me. It never failed to hold my attention. Some of the subplots were very interesting. I just think it could have used another run from editors, and here's the deal: Lou Cameron wrote so many books and so many good books, and I want to encourage you to explore them. But I just don't think that Code 7 was one of them. So you can probably safely skip this one. The book is Code 7 by Lou Cameron, and the review is going up on the Paperback Warrior site, I believe, this week. So that's all I got for you there. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, we're just about out of time. Look for both of these books that we reviewed today. They're going to be on the website this week. And again, be sure to delve into the website, dig a little bit, poke around, see what you can find. There's a lot of genres, a lot of books, a lot of publishers, a lot of reviews, a lot of content. So be sure to delve. Let us know what you want to hear about on the show, what you want us to talk about. What you'd like for us to review. Again, paperbackwarrior@yahoo.com. You can visit us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you can also leave comments on the site itself. If you read a review and like it or dislike or have a different opinion, drop a comment in there. It'll alert to us, and we'll go read it and maybe ignore it or maybe respond to you, just depending on what you say. And that's it. I guess we're wrapping this up.
That's it. Be cool, guys. We'll see you at the bookstore.
Bye-bye.